All right, so let's take a look at where we left off. There was a subtle change since then, though. Inside of my marble, I moved the light down. I'm also going to take that diffuse multiplier of the light down a little bit to maybe 200. And so when I play the game, you can see it's not as intense as that flashing Christmas light. All right, so let's talk a little bit about maybe some gameplay elements. Let's say the goal is the marble starts in the middle. We'll have some like walls. Maybe we'll make the marble a little bit smaller. And we need to get it through the maze, which doesn't exist quite yet, but it will, to a trigger box that's something over here. And if it's the first level, ideally, good game design, you want to make it as intuitive as possible, where a person's natural intuition would be able to figure out that you need to get a marble into a hole. There's also another school of thought. I'd worked on point-and-click adventure games in the past, and for a relatively big company. I don't want to say the name just yet because I don't want to divulge any of their information or say anything negative. But the thing behind that was we had done a lot of play testing for this particular game, and the kids couldn't figure out how to click or move around. And at the end of it, even with audio triggers and arrows and all this other stuff, it took a lot of hand-holding to get them to just figure out, like, for example, one of the levels required you to get an object to fix another object, like a wrench, let's say, to fix a motor. And even though the player would be like, man, I need to find a wrench, that would trigger after a set period of time, this kid still couldn't figure it out. So I'm going to show you the simplest, oldest way. And we can have this thing appear after a certain period of time, but at first to show people to be like, look, hey, you need to get this object into a little, into a hole, and we'll put a hole with a trigger box right here. So one way to do that is on our game board, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create two child entities. So there's one, and then I'm going to hit Control D, and that's to duplicate that child entity. Now entity 6, I'm just going to select both by holding Control. Then I'm going to press 2 to grab my move tool and just move it over to the right here. Now one child entity, let's hit Z to zoom in, will sit on top of the other. So this one will move up here, and we'll call this one arrow. And then this would be level underscore trigger. Now with the level trigger, we need to add a PhysX collider. Or let's start with just a regular trigger. So let's do a trigger area. Now this is a little outdated, but I will show you both. And then we're going to add a box shape. And this box shape indicates how big it is. Now if you don't see your shape in the editor, make sure you turn on visible. And you make sure this question mark is on. Now another thing I'd like to do is just have an arrow so the player can see it facing the camera. Now there's a couple ways to do this. You can use a canvas that's inside the scene, a UI canvas, but there's a much easier way, and that's by just simply adding a mesh component. And inside of this mesh component, either from Blender or whatever your chosen 3D application is, or in here in the starter game asset, we actually have a plane primitive. So I'm just going to type in plane, and I want to go with this primitive underscore plane. I'm going to hit OK here. Now I'm going to rotate it on X 90 degrees. And actually, let's rotate it on, I believe, Z 90 degrees. Is that what I'm looking for? No, I'm looking at Y. Quite often I get a little confused when I'm jumping between Blender and ZBrush and all these different programs because the coordinates get flipped. All right, so this is a little off, and I'm going to make this 0 so that it's pointed upward. Now I'd like to get a arrow texture onto this object, but this plane has a material override, but there is no arrow material. So what you can do is you can go to Tools, and we can go over to our material editor here by selecting it, or we can just press M, and that'll pop this guy open. Now, I had prepared one before for this tutorial. It's under the menus called Arrow, but I'm going to show you guys how to create a new one. So inside my marble game here, I'm going to select that folder, and I'm going to right click on there and do add new material. And I'm going to name this arrow underscore MTRL, all capitals. Now that's my normal default way of doing it. Now notice it didn't automatically navigate to that. So under start a game here, I'm going to go through and I want to find that marble game folder. And inside of here, I'm going to make a new folder and just call this one UI. And I'm going to select that folder and I'm going to save it. Now when I go down into my asset browser here, I'm going to find my marble game folder. You can see it created a UI folder, and there's my arrow material. Now I need to get an arrow texture into here. So I'm going to actually right click and open this UI folder in Explorer. And the reason for this is I like to just drag those in. Now I do have an arrow prepared that I had found in a royalty-free site online. Ideally, I would create my own. So I dragged this arrow texture in here, and it's in my marble UI. And I'm going to click over. My asset browser is pretty quick. It picked it up right away. Now what I can do is I can drag this arrow into, I believe, my diffusion slot. I guess not. Well, let's open it up. So under marble game UI, you can see there's my arrow PNG. Now, if I move this over, you'll notice that, actually, let's save this. And let's add this to our material override here. So this is our old one. This is the new one that we did together. And I'm going to expand that one more time. You want this one with the cog, and I'm going to hit OK. Now notice that it has the white border around it. So let's zero this out. Let's make this 90. There we go. The way that you can get this is you'll be like, oh, here's opacity. What you're looking for is you're looking for this this alpha test here, and if you just kind of move it from 0 to 1, it'll knock out the alpha for you. See that? So now if I move this down, you can see. So hopefully that's enough of an indicator to show you how to, show the player how to play. So for example, let's go ahead and save this one more time, and I'm going to close this. And if I hit Control G now, you can see like the arrow is there, and it's sort of indicating to the player that they need to go to that area. And it's kind of moving around. That light's a little bit too intense, but I mean, the game itself is, let's see, the game itself is just a fun, let's say, mobile game or something. And maybe we'll hook up some mobile controls. So I'm going to Control G one more time. It's a little bit less intense. I mean, I could fiddle with that all day. All right, so there's our arrow, kind of indicating where we can go. We're moving our board around. And something else I did, I forgot to mention, is I actually took these, the multiplier for the event down to 0.6 on each one, negative up top, to just give me a little bit more control so it's not as intense. All right, in the next video, we'll take a look at how we can hook up this trigger.